issues, the meeting is going to be recorded, and that's so that people who are not able to, who registered, not able to make it, can hear it later. And I would like you to, my suggestion is you're all on mute, but if you just turn your cameras off as well, because you know, it's just a less distraction. If you have questions as we go through, please put them in the chat, and we'll deal with as many as we can at the time, and then any others that we'll try and address afterwards. Today we're actually, it's the first of a series of seminars we're going to put together with the VPR's office to actually address lots of different aspects of research activities and best practices relating to have your successful execution of your career and your research, and also how to avoid any of the pitfalls that can result in compliance problems and so on. The first of these is about publications, which, you know, if you're in the research landscape, is one of the main things that we do. So we've got two speakers, Scott Ballinger, who's the chair of the Faculty Council, and that of course deals with promotion and tenure, and Jeff Graveline, who's the Associate Dean for Research and Scholarly Communications in the libraries. The first part is Scott's going to talk about how the Faculty Council view and think about and use publications in evaluations for promotion and tenure. And the second part is about Jeff talking about how to avoid getting snared by or devoured by predatory journals. And I hope you'll find both very useful. Whatever stage of career you're at, I certainly learned a lot. So without further ado, I'm going to ask Scott to talk about the role of publications in promotion and tenure and its evaluation.
All right. Thanks, Victor. So I'll go ahead and get started right off so we can cover as much material as possible. So for those that are not familiar exactly what the Faculty Council is, it's a committee that's the principal advisory committee for the Dean of the School of Medicine. And while we perform multiple functions, I would say our primary charge and what we spend most of the time doing is we're evaluating and providing recommendations on packets for promotion and tenure to the Dean for the faculty of the School of Medicine. And it's composed of 19 faculty members, which represent a variety of departments across the school. And they elect a chair and vice chair. And so I've been the chair of the council for the past few years. I'm set to rotate off in about a year, and the vice chair, Alex Salai, will then become the chair, and they will then nominate a new vice chair. So the way the council works is for those that have been on study sections, it's quite similar. So after your packet gets through the departmental committees, it's forwarded to the School of Medicine, and then it's sent to the Faculty Council where it is assigned reviewers. And typically it'll be 2 to 3 reviewers. And the reviewers will then give basically a summary, much like a study section, of the packet, and then it's discussed among the body of the Faculty Council. So that's the basic concepts of how it works. And my goal today is to explain to you how publications kind of fit into the process. So, but first, you know, just to familiarize yourself with the process. So we have 3 areas of excellence. You have research, teaching, and service. If you're a tenure earning faculty, you have to show excellence in 2 of these areas for promotion or award of tenure. If you're a non-tenure earning faculty, you have to show excellence in 1 area, and you choose these areas. And once you choose the areas, you need to put a packet together. It's going to provide evidence, you know, to support that you are meeting these bars of excellence in your scholarly activities. Now, promotion and tenure, the decisions are independent. So they're voted on separately, and they can occur at the same time or they can occur at different times. So for example, a packet might come through requesting promotion from assistant to associate professor one cycle, and the council will deliberate on that. And then a couple of years later, that same candidate will then ask for award, and they're voted on then as what, at that point in time. Or alternatively, you can ask for both at the same time, but they are voted on separately. If you want to know more details about the process or the areas of excellence, what we're looking for, I have two links here. I have a link to the UAB faculty handbook, and then perhaps more specifically, the link to the School of Medicine faculty handbook if you're interested in looking at those. So the two types of considerations we do as faculty councils, we consider promotion of rank, assistant professor to associate professor, and then associate to full professor. And then we will also, as I indicated earlier, we will also make recommendations of the award of tenure, which is a separate thing. So, what is the role of publications in all of this? Well, they're actually one of several components, depending on the area of excellence that are considered. And I think historically, most may think publications represent something mostly regarding research excellence, but actually in the council, publications can be applied to all three areas. But for the context of today's conversation, because we generally do see it mostly with research excellence, I'll probably be providing examples mostly related to that. But I think the examples I provide are generic enough that they could be applied to the other areas as well. So what do? They can provide evidence and actually a metric for assessing independence, collegiality, and scholarly activity. And I'll define and give you a better idea of what we're referring to those in the talk that follows. So in terms of the type of publications and how the reviewers consider them, I have a table here, and this isn't an exhaustive list of the types of publications we may see in the council, but this is the most common ones, I would say. And of them, I would say the original manuscript, a peer-reviewed original manuscript, is probably the one that is weighted perhaps more heavily than the others. And we also do consider the impact of the journal, but that said, there is no set algorithm that we use to determine the significance of a paper that's published in a journal based solely on its impact factor. It's a bit more complex than that. We also get case reports. Again, the reviewer is going to want to make sure that these are peer reviewed. And this, of course, is something that we typically see more with our clinical faculty, and they're important. They're looked at in that sense, and also journal impact is considered. Reviews are also important. And the reason they're important, well, again, we're going to look, are they peer reviewed? Were they invited? Is it a mini review? Is it a comprehensive review? And what's the quality of journal that they're in? And what these really represent, I think, from the council's perspective of this is, it's an invited review, it's an indication of recognition of your scientific contribution to the area that the review is in. And so this kind of addresses not only your impact, your scholarly impact on the area, but it also represents a level of national or international recognition based upon the journal. We will see book chapters and textbooks as well. And those typically are looked at in light of teaching excellence. And the reason is because they are a form of teaching materials. And again, they also address the question of a national level of recognition. Now, the two other areas, commentary and editorials, those are examined. Typically, we prefer that they are invited commentaries or editorials, and that they have undergone some level of review. And again, this can be elaborated in your summaries for your different excellence areas. And we will also examine journal impact. And so in some sense, similar to the reviews, if you're invited for a commentary on either a topic in science, it doesn't necessarily have to be a publication in that journal, but just a topic, opinion, viewpoint. that indicates that you have a level of national or international recognition, and that addresses that. And if it's in a top tier journal, that's certainly something that makes an impression on the council. A similar fashion with the editorials. In your CVs, you have a section that are on published abstracts. Typically, those are not highly considered in terms of getting the overall feeling for your area of excellence. And that's because it's not viewed that they're really undergoing intensive peer review. The other thing I will say, and this is something that's not on here, is preprints. And for those that are unfamiliar with preprints, this is a mechanism for getting your, typically something in the form of similar to like an original manuscript. It's a way of getting it out there for the public to view and see and make comments on. And I think the original intent is that this enables the researcher to basically polish up the manuscript for submission to a peer-reviewed journal for publication. This is becoming more common on packets, as we will see people that are listing preprints as publications. And that is not how they're viewed at the faculty council. So it needs to undergo a peer review process. Okay. So in terms of scholarship, again, as I said, we're using publications to assess scholarship. We also use them to assess independence and collegiality. So what do I mean when I say scholarship? Well, we're looking at the journal that it's published in, the focus and fit, impact, the frequency of your publications, and I just outlined the type of publication, and I have slides to talk about each of these topics that are coming up. And then lastly, we look at the context of the authorship in terms of whether you're communicating or a co-author on a paper. And again, I'll be discussing those in a bit more detail and give you examples. So for focus and fit, from my personal opinion, this should be pretty much common sense. The journal you're publishing in should be logical based upon the topic or area that you're in. So, and the council does look at that. If you're doing cardiovascular research, it would make most sense to be publishing in journals that publish cardiovascular research and not something that it's atypical for that particular journal. It also needs to be consistent with the research area of not only the journal, but in terms of your promotion or award of tenure, what your packet is presenting. So if you say your level of expertise or your focus is in cardiovascular research, then the papers you're publishing should be consistent with that. And that's something that is considered. And lastly, again, the common sense aspect is you should be trying to publish your papers in journals that have significant impact factors and appropriate audience for that particular paper. Impact factors, as I indicated earlier, there is no specific formula for equating publications in something like a Cell or Science with journals that have lower impact factors. This is a question I get probably at least once a month. They want to know they just published something in Cell and how many papers is that equivalent to in, say, JBC? There's no answer for that. Similarly, if you are publishing in a top tier specialty journal, you need to let the reviewer know. So my expertise is in cardiovascular disease. So I will recognize a packet that someone has been published in circulation or circulation research. However, if your actual area of expertise is, say, in rheumatology, I won't know what the top tier journal is in that. So you need to remind me of that in your portfolio summary. The way we try to put publications in context is we look at what the paper is about. We try to, and it's not uncommon for viewers to actually pull specific papers and look at them to determine the impact on the science. We're also interested to find out if the paper is highly cited. And we occasionally see this in packets where the citation numbers are by all the papers, and that's quite helpful. And then I guess the bottom line of what we're really trying to interpret at the council is, are these publications having a significant impact on scientific discovery and advances? And so, those are the types of questions and things we're trying to find out. You can address things as, an applicant in your portfolio. And so, for example, if you published a paper where you were the first to show some particular mechanism which is relevant for hypertension, be sure to indicate that in your summary. And so the reviewer will know this. This helps in us trying to get a feeling of what the impact is of your publications. Another question I get asked almost weekly as faculty council chair is, what's the magic number? So I want to go up to associate professor. I have X number of papers. Is that going to be enough? Believe me, I actually wish there was a magic number, because that might make our job a little bit easier, but there isn't. Really, publications are simply something, they're a metric that kind of contributes to an overall gestalt, as we say, in an area of excellence. So it's just one area for your chosen area that you're looking at. And we're trying to find out, is that consistent with excellence? But in terms of numbers, the way we typically look at them is we're going to look at them based upon when your hire was. So if you come in as an assistant professor and now you're asking for promotion to associate, we're going to be looking at your publication productivity and the types of publications you're doing in that interim. Okay, we're not going to be looking at what you did as a postdoc or as a PhD or perhaps as an MD fellow. So that's one aspect that we're looking at. We also look at it is if you were promoted at UAB and now you're asking to be promoted to the next level, we take that into consideration. So let's say, for example, you're an associate professor and you want to go up for professor. We're going to look at, if you were at UAB as an assistant professor and you got promoted to associate, we're going to kind of look at that and we're going to say, well, okay, during that period, they were publishing 2 to 3 papers a year as a communicating author. And now we're looking at going from associate to professor. And we're going to look at that and say, are they maintaining that level of productivity? Has it increased? Hopefully. Or has it gone down? If it's changed, that's going to result in a conversation in the faculty council about what's going on. And again, you can address it. If you can address these things, it's helpful to do so. H indexes are important in regards to evaluations as well. Sometimes, however, if you have a low H index and you've published a lot of papers, the message that's going to send to the reviewer is perhaps your work isn't very impactful. So those are considerations that you need to be aware of. In terms of rank and focus, in terms of your numbers, I'm going to address that a little bit more in the next slide. And really this more often in the discussions at the faculty council level. This discussion usually comes up going from assistant to associate professor. It does occur occasionally at the next level, but this is where there's a lot of discussion. And the things we're looking for are independence, productivity, and scholarship, which basically, what's the impact of your work? If you have gaps in publication years, they need to be explained. And if they're not explained, then you're leaving it up to the council to interpret why there's a gap. And more often than not, that's probably not going to work out in your favor. So if there's a legitimate reason for that, it's helpful to know what that is. And then again, citation numbers. So believe it or not, council members will go in and they'll find out on certain papers how often have they been cited. They will look at things like that. And I think the conversation I've been having with faculty that don't sit on council, the surprise to them is they don't realize how intensively we do look at your publications to get a feeling of your scholarship. But going back to the example of stated focus area and numbers. So what is not uncommon is that we'll have 2 packets. And again, we don't compare packets to each other, but the illustrative purposes are here is I'm trying to show you that different conversations are going to happen in the council with each of these type of packets. So we have one applicant here that has 10 communicating authorships on original manuscripts in the past 5 years, and they're asking to be promoted. Well, the council member and the reviewers are going through it, and they realize that 2 of them are consistent with the stated research interests of the faculty candidate based upon their packet, and 1 is in a related area. But then they have 7 papers that have really very little to do or nothing to do with their stated research interest. that's going to lead to a different type of conversation in regards to the impact of this candidate's scholarship and what they stated their area of interest or focus is, as compared to another individual that actually has fewer communicating authorships, but the majority of them are all consistent with their research area. So hopefully I'm kind of giving you an idea of the type of conversations that happen. It's not purely just about numbers. It's about what are the papers about and what have they done. Now, in terms of authorship, just an additional thing, and this was something that someone mentioned to me and I realized is relevant. If you have a common name or even an uncommon name like Scott W. Ballinger, as it turns out, there's another Scott W. Ballinger out there that does a lot of medical research in gynecology. It's not unusual for a council member to do a PubMed search on you, and they will pull up a whole list of publications potentially, especially if you have a common name. So if it's possible, you could provide an ORCID ID or something to help clarify that for the council member so they don't get confused if that's what they're doing. But in terms of where you are on the author, this is typically how it is examined. We're going to be looking for communicating authorship. And the reason is that should be an evidence of independence. And of course, I've got a double asterisk for that. And the reason is if you're asking, and this is most commonly happens going from assistant to associate professor, is you have a previous mentor on your papers. And so if there's a mentor on those papers and you're the communicating author, or if you're a co-author and they're a co-author on all your papers, this is going to present potentially a problematic discussion in the council, because then we're going to start asking questions: is the candidate actually independent? And so examples, and these actually examples I have here are not really out there. We do see similar situations to this in council. We will have an individual that is communicating author on 12 original manuscripts over a period of 6 years while at UAB. We look at them and we find out that 10 of them have a postdoc mentor or a PhD mentor as a co-author, and 2 have no past mentors. That's going to lead to a different type of a discussion in the council, as opposed to an individual that maybe only has 8 original manuscripts in 6 years, but only 1 of them has a postdoc mentor, and it's the first one. The rest of them have no mentors as co-authors. And so this is going to lead us to think, well, maybe the second packet in this particular instance, less likely we're going to have any discussions about what is the person independent. Just a few, I guess, bookkeeping things about authorship. All authors should have contributed to the publication. And what I suggest to you is you can look at the UAB policy statement in terms of assignment and responsibility of authorship. And what I have listed here is basically a way to find it on the UAB website. And of course, a lot of journals now will want you to define what the different authors did on the paper as well. Lastly, if you're a corresponding author, you have multiple different institutions listed as you're affiliated with them, that potentially can be problematic, because at a council level, because we may be wondering about, was this work really done here at UAB or was it somewhere else? And from a funding agency perspective as well, if they catch wind of that, because then they may start asking questions of, well, when we funded you, it was at this institution, and for that, yet you have multiple institutions listed on a paper that's directly related to our funding. And so you may have to address questions about that. But that's just I guess, a bookkeeping or a reminder. Lastly, if editorial board memberships are important, and typically they're looked at as this is evidence of a national level of recognition in your area. The council member is going to check to confirm that you are a member of that editorial board if it is listed. They will go to the journal's website and see if they can find that you're listed as a member. If you are not, and that occasionally happens, that does lead to another discussion in the council. So be aware of that. If you are trying to determine how you could join an editorial board or be invited to join, Alex Salai, actually the vice chair of the council, sent me these links. They're actually for the same paper, but it was published in Nature, and it provides information and tips on how to go about doing it in a manner that is helpful. And lastly, and this is something you should be doing, you should be serving as a reviewer for journals, an ad hoc reviewer for a variety of different journals. So this is a good thing, don't get me wrong. But when you're putting your packet together, be sure to list it in that light and not have it, listed as editorial board service, because that's not considered editorial board service at the council. And so context is important in that regard. So to summarize things, publications are one of the important metrics for assessing academic excellence. The goal should be to publish in the best journal with the appropriate audience. Authorship provides evidence of independence and collegiality with certain, as I discussed, caveats. The frequency also reflects productivity and focus. And collectively, these are the things that we look at the council to get an assessment of your scholarship and have you met, the excellence. And lastly, as Jeff is going to be discussing in the next section, is beware of predatory journals. And with that, I can stop sharing and turn it over to Jeff.
All right, thanks, Scott. Can you see that?
Yep.
Great. All right, thanks for that information, Scott. I'm going to segue into predatory publishing. Scott talked about the tenure promotion side. I'm going to talk about the publication side. My concern is we want to make it count. We want to make your research count. I'm going to give you some ideas of things to look for, pitfalls, traps when you're out there doing your publishing. But in order to do that, I want to back up for just a moment and talk about the traditional publishing model. A lot of what we're talking about when we do the predatory publishing are some of the newer publication models. But in order to understand those, we have to talk about the traditional publishing model. Everybody's very familiar with this. This has been around for a while. This is a very skeletal overview of it. But the four steps that I've got here are: you'll submit your paper to the Journal of Society. It's subjected to the accepted peer review process within your discipline. And that varies discipline to discipline. Typically in the print setting, you're going to then assign your copyright to the publisher, and that's in exchange for publishing it. This can come at various times throughout the process, and then kind of the final step is publication, and that publication has traditionally been behind a paywall. In the print realm, it was you'd have to purchase or subscribe to the journal. In the electronic side, it's the electronic access to the journal, so through a database, typically through the library at your university. So that's a traditional publishing model. Everybody's familiar with it. It worked well in the print era. The primary goal of scholarly publishing is the dissemination and advancement of knowledge. Just kind of keep that in mind as we go when we talk about the predatory publishing. So as we have moved into the electronic area or the electronic arena, we've moved to the open access publishing model. On the third point of the previous slide, in the traditional publishing model was the transfer of your copyrights to the publisher in exchange for publication. Open access typically allows you to retain your rights, and it makes your work freely available online for no charge to the end user. And that is it's a big change from the traditional publishing model. Whoops. Sorry about that. It's a big change from the traditional publishing model. It was originally driven by a desire for more research openness. So traditionally it was behind the paywall. Now we want to make the research freely available to the world. And the internet has allowed us to do that. one of the big myths that I hear, and you all probably have heard it as well, is that if it's open access, it's always going to be less rigorous than the traditional publication model. And that's just not true. It is true that the predatory publishing industry has built up around open access, but that certainly doesn't mean that because a publication is available open access, it is necessarily any less impactful, or the peer review has been any less rigorous than the traditional publishing model. And then the digital world really has changed the playing field for this. One thing that has led to a lot of people to say that OA publishing is less rigorous are these article processing fees. They're open access fees. If you've ever published open access, you're familiar with them. And that's essentially the fee that goes to pay for the publication cost. This is not a pay to play necessarily charge. And so some people will view the APC as I'm just paying, or you're just paying to have your publication or your work published. And that's certainly, again, not true. The traditional and open access publishing model can exist side by side. They can coexist, and they certainly do. I was reviewing an American Chemical Society publishing agreements this morning, and you have the option to publish in the traditional publishing model where you transfer your rights, or you have the option to publish an open access model where you make it, where the ACS makes it freely available. And these are the same journals. So one thing I do want to point out is open access can be a specific journal. So an entire journal can be open access and everything's available, or it can be a hybrid journal where some things within the journal are traditional and they're paywalled and other things are open access. I mean, that's how they really can coexist well together. All of that really depends on the publishing agreement you sign when you publish. But that said, I'm going to move on to the next, to really the meat of my presentation, of what I want to talk to you all about, and it's the predatory publishing. With open access, we've really seen a huge rise in predatory publishing. Everybody has seen it. I'm sure we've all been approached by it. So in a nutshell, what is predatory publishing? They're publishers that really prey on academics. They prioritize their self-interest and profit at the expense of scholarship. The motive of predatory publishers is profit. Now, that's not to say there are not for-profit publishers. There are many, many for-profit publishers, but they also have the motivation of the dissemination of knowledge in advance as part of their motivation as well. Predatory publishers simply don't have that. They want to publish, they want to make money, and it really does not matter what they publish for the most part. One thing I will point out is when we talk about predatory publishing, we're not, and bad journals or bad publishers, we're not talking about second tier or third tier journals when we're looking at impact factors. Those are completely separate, and those are not necessarily considered predatory publishers or predatory journals. They may just not be top tier journals. So let's make sure we draw that distinction as we go through here. They are typically, and I'll walk through some of the flags we should look for, but they're kind of often will have false and misleading information. They very often deviate from the best editorial practices. So the peer review process is very often going to be much different than what you're used to and then what is accepted within the academic community. There's often a lack of transparency, both on the peer review side and on the publication side and on the journal and publisher side. So that can cause lots of issues. And then finally, the aggressive and indiscriminate solicitation practices. I can guarantee you almost all of us have had this week 1 to 2 or 3 unsolicited emails from publishers asking us to publish in their journals. So those are that's what predatory publishing is. You should always avoid them because they are it's detrimental to your professional reputation. Very often they won't be counted for promotion, tenure and promotion. They do look at those, and if they're predatory journals, there may be questions about them. And then finally, another consideration is by publishing in these, you really are perpetuating these journals. You're allowing them to blossom and continue. So keep that in mind. It may be easy to publish in them, but you really don't want to publish in them. I'm going to give you two examples. These are kind of fun examples, or what I think are somewhat funny examples of actual published journal articles that are clearly from predatory journals. So the first one, this is from the journal, International Journal of Molecular Biology. It's an open access journal. You see, it's, it looks fairly standard from what we have here. The first thing you'll notice is you see the bait and switch here. It's the title is mitochondria, but then it says mitochondria, also referred to as midichlorians. So that should be, that might be one of your first red flags. Then if you look at the authors, it's Lucas McGeorge and Annette Kin. May not raise any flags until you go further down into it and you look at some of the language in there is, the key functions of midichlorians are force sensitivity. Some of y'all, this may be ringing a bell for some of you as we go. And then finally, just kind of thrown randomly into the middle of it is a dialogue from the Star Wars trilogy about, did you ever hear the tragedy of Darth Plagueis? So for those of you that know, midichlorians is how you measure the force in Jedi Knights in the Star Wars series. And throughout the whole paper are peppered in these things. This is a paper that went through peer review. Clearly should not have been published. Some of you may have heard of this, but this, this is dialogue directly from the movie, and it's just thrown in there. So had it really been through the peer review process, this would not have happened. Another example is this article from the American Journal of Biomedical Science and Research. And I've actually had another run-in with this journal with another author here at UAB. But if you look at this, you look at the article here, it's this city. There was a outbreak of COVID linked to this consumption of this bat here. If you just look at it, and this is again another peer-reviewed thing. So it's a localized outbreak of COVID-19 in this city, and they've tentatively linked it to consumption of regional insectivorous Zubat. If just the general public sees this, they might be interested in it, until you look a little bit further and you realize that the Sillage City is actually a city in Pokemon, the kids game Pokemon, and the insectivorous Zubat is this little animal right here, this cartoon bat within the Pokemon world. So again, this is an example of a peer-reviewed publication that went through peer review, clearly a bogus thing. And you don't want to be affiliated with those journals. So that means you don't want to be affiliated with a journal that, that will publish that. So on a more serious note, I do want to kind of cover what are the red flags. So you may have been approached about publishing somewhere. You may be doing some independent research on where to publish. There are some warning signs that you should always consider. Remember, two things I want to point out before we start, or note before we start. There's two, you always want to look at the journal, and you also want to look at the publisher, because there are predatory journals and then there are predatory publishers. And predatory publishers may have 15 different journals that are all predatory. So you want to kind of back up the chain as far as you can. The other thing I'll point out, it's at the bottom of this slide, but it's very important as we go for you to keep in mind. You want to look at the totality of the circumstances. Just like any other analysis you're doing when you're looking at copyrighted publishing, one factor may or may not make it weigh in favor of a predatory journal. But if you're checking the box for all of these, it's very likely that this journal is going to be predatory and you want to kind of avoid it. I'm going to run through these, and then I'm going to show you some real life examples of these journals from their websites. So the first thing is, do you get a lot of unsolicited and persistent emails? We've all got those. We've all seen them, and they're always very grandiose. The grandiose emails with lots of word salad in there on the solicitation. So you want to be wary of those. Does the journal cover a very, very broad variety of topics? There certainly are some journals that cover a broad variety of topics, but if it covers too many topics, you want to be concerned. If it covers, early childhood education and cancer research, probably want to steer clear of something like that. And that's not, I kind of say that tongue in cheek, but I've seen these journals that will cover everything from soup to nuts. You want to spend some time looking at the website. Is it unprofessional? Are there many spelling errors? Are there lots of grammatical errors? One or two may not raise a red flag, but many should raise a red flag. Is it an unknown journal? That doesn't mean new journals are not good. And I've recommended publication in new journals to many people, but is it a journal that nobody in your field knows about, that may have been around for 4 or 5 years? If that's the case, you may want to really look into that. Is there a standard peer review practice? Does it follow that standard peer review practice? There are certainly different peer review practices per discipline for different disciplines, different journals. But if they're offering a one week turnaround time or a 10-day turnaround time, or you can pay extra money to have it reviewed in 2 days, you may want to be wary of that. Now, granted, there are journals that can do a very, very quick turnaround on peer review, but just kind of be aware and use the smell tests on something like that. The next thing is it reputably indexed? And the journal should tell you where they're indexed. You want to make sure that it's indexed in a reputable place and in multiple reputable sources, because really ultimately what that does, if it's not indexed anywhere, nobody's going to find it. So if it's not in Scopus, if it's not in PubMed, no one's going to find it unless they go and they search within this journal. So you want to keep on, look at that, as well as impact factors. Are they using clear and accurate impact factors? The APCs, the publishing charges, are they reasonable and are they clearly set out, or will they tell you at some later date how much you owe? You want to make sure you look on that. Finally, and I've got this included just as an additional thing to think about, there's an old list that was published by a librarian, I believe in the Northeast. It's called Beal's List. It's no longer published, but I always like to search the name of the journal and see if it's been included on any of the earlier versions or current versions of Beal's List. So you want to kind of look at that. And if you see those, look at the totality of the circumstances here and make your determination. Now let's look at a couple things here. This is an unsolicited email that somebody got. The first thing you want to look at is it's a personal account. Typically, an email is not going to come from somebody's Yahoo account. It may, but this is just one red flag. If you've gotten multiple emails from this same person or from the same journal, you're looking at the multiple solicitations. There's many examples, and I've only put 2 in here, of poor grammar throughout the email. You want to look at poor grammar. You want to look at spelling mistakes. And those are very often big red flags. If we go and look at this journal's actual website, it's the International Journal for Innovation Education Research. There are many red flags on this too. You've got a misspelling right there, paper templates. It's clearly misspelled. There's others. These are just a few of the highlights on it. Here is a very short peer review process. They say they don't want to sacrifice the judgment of the paper, so they take a maximum of 2 weeks to peer review. And I believe this one, you may be able to pay for shorter peer review process. I don't think that probably is an adequate peer review period. But people in the field may be able to, make an argument that would, but that's one of their flags. The other one is, in this one, it's an overly broad scope of coverage. So this journal covers science, technology, business, economics, social sciences, arts, humanities, a whole variety of things. So looking at the totality of it, where you look at your email, then you look at the journal website, this is probably one you want to steer clear of. The next one is the American Journal of Biomedical Science and Research. This is a journal that did the Pokemon article. A couple of things here. This is a key factor here is this ISI impact factor of 1.042. That's purposely misleading. So the standard and accepted impact factors are from the JCR, Journal of Citation Reports, and it's from a company called ISI's Web of Knowledge, which is from Thomson Reuters. And so by them saying this is an ISI impact factor, it implies that this is an actual impact factor. But when you click on it, it is some completely bogus impact factor that has nothing to do with traditional impact factors. So it's purposely misleading there. As with others, there are multiple grammatical errors throughout the website. There's no real indexing or abstracting. These are the only places they're indexed and abstracted. And this is just absolutely not acceptable for a good research journal. And then finally, this is what I always do, is to Google the name of the journal and predatory, see what other people are saying. And then you can come back, look at your checklist and make a determination on your own if you think this is a good journal, if you don't think it's a good journal. So those are just two examples that I've got. A few takeaways and just kind of recaps. Remember that open access doesn't always equal low quality. There are many examples, and I really do push open access, and I'm a big proponent of it. Take time to research the journals that you want to publish in. Using kind of the tips that I gave you here, there's some checklists we can use. That'll save you a lot of heartache and pain in the future, I think. Finally, lastly, use common sense. If it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And then finally, ask for office from the UAB Library's Office of Scholarly Communication. So I'm the Associate Dean for Scholarly Communication, but I'm also the Director of the Office of Scholarly Communication. And I work with authors all over campus in doing journal assessments like this. And I'll be happy to help anybody out that needs any help or questions about it. And so that's all I've got. So Scott and Victor, or I'll turn it back over to y'all.
Thank you. That was excellent from both of you. So we're open to any questions that you might have. If anybody wants to kick off in the chat. Okay, so I've got one in the chat. So thanks for the great information. Should authors prefer publishing in a journal in their narrow field of practice or a general journal like Science with higher impact factor? Scott, you can have a go at that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, again, use your best judgment. I mean, if you have been looking at, some of these top tier journals, then you're also going to be aware of the amount of work that typically is in their publications. And, if you feel like you have something that is very novel and, could really change the field or bring it forward, then, by all means, you can go ahead and go for that. Usually and unfortunately, as I say, I've been rejected by the best journals, right? But you usually find fairly soon in terms of turnaround. The thing is if they go out after the initial review, it's going to be just like a lot of journals where you have to wait a while to actually go out for review. And then often the revisions are quite extensive when you want to publish in those journals. But, again, this is a common sense thing. And I would say use your best judgment. It often will take, it's no exaggeration. It could take a couple of years to get something published in the Science or Cell, if you're addressing all the revisions that are usually requested.
I mean, we have quite a few people at UAB who publish quite successfully, regularly in journals, and it's worth talking to them about what it took and what kind of thing is interesting. And all of those journals actually have a pre-review process where they get, actually none of them send your paper out to review at that level, whereas a lower impact, more specialized journal will almost always send it out to review. So the editorial staff, not the they are scientifically trained, Cell or something, they will look at your paper first and determine suitable or not. So there's nothing lost in some ways in putting an abstract in, but don't underestimate the commitment needed and the amount of data needed. Typically, the amount of data is suitable for 3 different publications quite often. Go on to one for Jeff now from Peter Privilege. You seem to emphasize the distinction between traditional and open access around copyright transfer. As a user, I always thought it was a paywall or not. Can you elaborate on the reason copyright transfer enters into it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the reason the copyright transfer is important is, traditional publishing, you as the author transfer your rights to the publisher, which means that the publisher now determines who can access it, how it can be accessed. Under open access, under open access, it is usually under a Creative Commons license, which means it is open for anybody to use. And that doesn't happen under a normal transfer of copyrights. And there are many different ways that you can assign the copyrights within the work, but that really has to do with it because open access, the definition of open access is it's open, it's free, anybody can use it, and it's available on the internet. That doesn't happen with a traditional publishing model where you assign your copyright to a publisher.
And, it's worth knowing, you do have to know what the requirements for your funding agency are for publication. Because, for example, some agencies require open access publishing, which you may have to pay for it in a traditional model and pay quite a lot, actually. Or alternatively, you have to put it into another format and put it on the NIH website.
Yeah, and I do a lot of review of author agreements and publishing agreements. So if anybody has questions about those, they can come to the office as well, and I'll be happy to walk through those.
Another question for you, Jeff, I think. Very informative, thank you. What about these NDPI journals that keep popping up with special issues? What about special issues in general? So, and I'll ask about Jeff about that also, Scott. What about special issues in promotion and tenure? So Jeff, you first.
I've reviewed a few of them, and I think it depends on the journal they're coming from. I've seen some that are good. I've seen some that, and I just did a review a few weeks ago for somebody that was interested in a special issue. And it was clearly they were focusing on people, and it was a predatory journal. But that goes back to looking at the journal and the publisher. So it can vary, one may be good and one may not be, but you'd have to go back and look at them individually.
Yeah, I would echo that. That's actually how they'd probably be interpreted too at the council for review. Is it would be, if it's a special issue, for what journal is it? And then, what's the nature of that journal? And like I said before, it wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility that the reviewer will actually pull that special issue and go through it. Similar answer, I guess.
And one of the things that is, again, a bit of a red flag is if you get what appears to be a personalized email, which quotes one of your papers and says they want to publish that paper. Well, remember, you can't publish a paper twice, but also the same paper twice, but also it means that they're trying to appeal to your sense of interest that they don't really have. I mean, it's an automated process, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
We've got a minute or two. If there are any other questions, if anybody like to put
I mean,
up.
I see one, Victor, that I think it's a relevant question for faculty council. It's about basically journal impact factor. And I tried to address that. So if you're in a specialty, for example, where, you know, the journals that everybody reads, you know, may not have a high impact factor, but you're publishing in them, how's that considered in promotion? Again, the good thing about the council, it does have faculty from across campus. And so it's likely there will be a member on that council that will be aware of the journal and can speak up. But I would also argue in your summary, you know, don't be afraid to point out that this is the journal that everybody reads. And while it might not have a super high impact factor, it is the one that if you're for your audience, that's the logical journal to go in. And so that's how I propose handling that. And then again, the other question is, you know, it takes a lot more effort to get something in a top tier journal. How is that considered? Well, the council, you know, we realize that. And so that's why I was kind of going through the point that it's when we evaluate your publications, it's more than we just look at the number and the journals you're in. Well, actually, you know, we'll look at the papers themselves and get that assessment. And that's how I think we attempt to address that.
Thank you. There's one here. How would you label a faculty member being a national certifying board exam question editor?
Yeah.
That's not really
so,
an extension thing, but it's a different thing.
Yeah, that typically would fall under service. And we would also look at it in terms of a national level of recognition. But again, this is something, and I don't think a lot of faculty don't understand the value of the 2-page summary for they have for their each area of excellence. Elaborate what that is, because then that's quite helpful. And that again, that's how you can distinguish the difference.
There's one here. New stress when trying to publish higher impact journals harder to get into. That's true. Less impact journals easier to be published in. Not as true as you might think. I mean, often the reviewers and the reviews are the same, but more likely to charge for publication. Absolutely not true. In fact, the very high impact journals have pretty high charges, in fact. So, yeah, publishing is a stress and it's part of our landscape. I think that it's up in grants and so on, there's publication funds and things to pay for that, but there are lots and lots of good high quality journals which the funding model doesn't require you pay page charges or a publication charge. And if you don't have those funds, use those. You're not really compromising anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
How would someone as a research faculty with someone previously then came to UAB on tenured track and receiving multiple PI grant with that PI and then publish as senior co-author be treated at the tenure decision?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll be honest with you, if all your publications have that faculty member on them, it is going to be discussed is what's the level of independence that you have. And so you'll have to be able to clearly make the argument that what you're doing is independent or distinct from, let's just say this, perhaps was a mentor, okay? That's the task you're gonna have to have. And also, you know, the determination if you're an MPI or you the contact PI, you know, questions like that will be looked at. But yeah, that sort of situation you described will very likely lead to a discussion in the council.
Yeah. Thank you. Will the papers showing up in PubMed have more impact versus ones that do not? Absolutely, because a reputable journal it takes. It's
going to be in PubMed.
Yeah. Jeff knows better than me. Jeff, you need to speak to this. But how does a journal get into PubMed?
Yeah, so I kind of think of that as you know, it's like searching, will you find it? It's like searching between Google and Bing. PubMed's going to have a lot more. It's going to be much more reputable. So yes, I mean, clearly it's going to have more impact just because you may be able to find it searching on just Google, which you could, some of these predatory things, you're going to have much more impact if it's in PubMed because it's they're reputable, they're vetted. Anybody just can't put anything they want in PubMed.
Yeah, it's a very highly vetted process.
Yeah.
So a new journal has a period of 2 years probationary activity, in which they have to prove that they are acting like a reputable journal. So a accredited journal can't really get into PubMed.
No.
Well, we've come to the end of the time. So thank you all so much, and thank you very much to Scott and Jeff for this. If you have any other questions or anything that come up, please let us know. And we hope to do more of these type of things. And we're interested in your suggestions about what we could do this kind of workshop type activity on, actually. So just shoot those to me anytime. Thank you all.
Yeah, thanks.